Welcome to Innovating with Scott Amyx. I'm your host, Scott, and I've been joined by Tom Thimot, who is the CEO of Socure. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
All right. Now, a few years back, you were helping out with a charity called Dream Big. Can you talk about what is it and how does it help, I guess, in the particular campaign that you were involved, how does it help girls from low-income backgrounds?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Dream Big, I'm very, very passionate about. I think being a father of three daughters and, watching them grow up and seeing that, anytime they wanted to take part in an extracurricular activity, whether it be dance or art or sports, we're very fortunate. We're well off. They're able to take part in those. But if you look at inner cities, you look at more challenged backgrounds where there's not as much financial resources, a lot of times kids, and particularly girls, are not able to participate in sports or other extracurricular activities. Literally stories of, the boys get off from their basketball game and their practice jerseys, sweaty, are handed to the girls, and that's what they get to use for their practices. Or, finding volleyballs or the right shoes or the basketball or the nets, etc. And there's all sorts of statistical data that shows that a kid that has a passion outside of school makes them that much better in school. It not just keeps them out of trouble, but helps them to have a purpose. And every college entrance exam and discussion talks about being well-rounded. And yes, it's great to get straight A's, and that's what you always try to achieve. But you should be able to demonstrate that you have other passions in life. And, we've got to do some things to level the playing field. And Dream Big basically sponsors girls, teams in low-income environments, provides them with shoes and balls and uniforms so that they can take the field just like the kids in more well-to-do communities like where I live.
I think that is terrific. And certainly there are I think obstacles like shoes, like equipment. I mean, when you think about golf or hockey as an example, not only do you need the equipment, you actually have to know how to ski. Or if you're swimming, you actually need access to a pool. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles and challenges, I think, structurally that some of these kind of marginalized communities have. So thank you for doing your part to lend a help and help them to dream big. The other thing on a personal level is it sounds like you're really passionate about travel. Why and what do you get out of it?
Travel is, I believe, what's the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans. I think when you travel, you learn an awful lot about people, about culture. I think it gains, I used to watch some of my American colleagues try to open up European offices in France. And, the first thing they'd say to the customer was something in English. Now, I don't speak French, but it's not hard to teach yourself how to say, s'il vous plaît, parlez-vous anglais? Ask them in French if they speak English. In a business environment, it's extremely likely they speak English, but it's just the tone. And it's understanding that every culture is not the same as ours. And, whether it's, early in my career at Oracle, I got to work out of the Middle East. I've spent a lot of time in Asia, South America, business is done differently. And a lot of it is rooted in the culture and the language and the religion and the food. And it's through traveling that you really appreciate that all people are different, but by being different, they're kind of all the same. And, they want someone on the other side of the table that respects them and their culture and, at least understands a little bit about it, enough to say, s'il vous plaît.
Well, I think what you're saying is really this fundamental notion of respect that's contextualized and localized. Yep. And, one of the things that I've been kind of digging into recently is this notion of honor-based nations and cultures versus those that are pride-based or even face-based, and how those things play into this business etiquette and the context that you're referring to, and how you position certain deals and proposals so that it actually edifies those different dimensions, aside from they are as archetypes. So right. Terrific. Now, early in your career, you were a DBA, a database administrator. So I'm curious to know what got you fascinated about and that continue that passion for data? And how is emerging technologies changing the value that we derive from data?
Absolutely. So, I was a mechanical engineer out of Marquette University. And, when I was choosing where I wanted to go to work, I decided early on, and no disrespect meant to any mechanical engineer, but I didn't want to go and design lug nuts for General Motors. I realized that data was something that was really expanding and that all businesses relied on. And so being able to model and plan and use data to run a better business was real exciting to me. So I joined Accenture and was a database administrator. And my first assignment, imagine coming out of college, and the first place they send you to is a brewery. And I was sent to Miller Brewing Company, where the first database I was involved with was the production scheduling system. So I had to basically figure out how long the Miller Lite was going to run down the line, and then when it was going to switch over to Miller High Life or Lowenbrau or the other brands that Miller had. And I also learned how important it was that you really work very carefully with your database design and your programs, because I recall one test run putting Lowenbrau into Miller Lite bottles. Imagine if you had gotten, you were expecting that light beer and the taste of a very heavy German beer came out. So from there, the passion of data, it just stayed with me.
Well, who would have thought that a DBA would have the power to control the taste and the content of beer? So that's a terrific story. Now, in past interviews, you mentioned this phrase called creating the knee in the curve. What does
Yep.
that mean?
Well, and I think, I also was blessed. I was many years, I was with Accenture, then Price Waterhouse, and I started at Oracle more in a capacity to help customers implement databases, so it was actually doing some DBA functions or leading teams of DBAs. And at one point I got the tap on the shoulder that said, hey, Tom, you're really a better salesperson than you are a database administrator. So you really ought to go into sales. That was both a compliment and not so much a compliment maybe in my database skills. But, a knee in the curve is when, you're growing a business, you're growing the revenue line, whether you're in sales or services, and you find that you're delivering value to the customers and you can get that revenue to grow disproportionately, not just along a linear line, but it really does take a curve up. And, we're talking a lot about curves nowadays with the whole COVID situation, but in effect, creating an exponential growth in the revenue or in the ROI that you're delivering to the customers, and then making sure that you've sold your customer on the value and that your customer is paying for your service or your software based on a return of that investment that they're getting. So when the customer makes more, you make more. It's always been the best. Everybody talks about a win-win relationship in a vendor-customer relationship. And the way you best achieve that is you tie your revenues to the value that the customer receives. And if you can create a knee in the curve, that means you've got a really wildly happy customer. And you also have happy shareholders, and because the revenue is going up and to the right.
I love that alignment of structurally creating that win-win scenario for the seller as well as the buyer or the customer. So that's terrific. So that's a great segue to talk about Socure and why you were recruited and installed as a CEO back in 2018.
Yeah, I had been a CEO a few times before, both in public and venture-backed companies, and had always worked. Every company has a passionate founder, whether it's a Steve Jobs or a Larry Ellison, or ones you may have heard less of, Sudhakar Mudu and Chris Cruz, ones that are in my past. They all have a passion for what it is they've invented, what they've brought to market, and Socure was no different. Sunil Madhu and Johnny Ayers had a passion for the identity. And in the case of Socure, Sunil was an immigrant and Johnny was a millennial. And who are the two groups of people that struggled to have their identity known? immigrants that are new to the United States, and millennials that may not have a deep credit file. And so Cure's mission was really set up to say, hey, we can use all the data, whether it's social data or other digital exhaust, in addition to the authoritative data sources, to really determine that you are you. And Sunil had that passion that data could be going all the way back to Dream Big. How do you level the playing field? Well, data levels the playing field, because if we're able to encompass all the data about people, it doesn't matter if you're an immigrant, a millennial, or a 50-something manager in a business. There is enough data out there to verify who you are. And if we get away from the traditional means, we can be sure that we can verify everyone's identity. And what that does is that opens up the opportunity offered by financial services companies and business in general to all people. And someone is not shut out of the financial opportunity that could be afforded them because their identity can't be verified. And so Sunil, Johnny, myself, we all had a shared appreciation that data could be a game changer to really help more and more people get access to credit, get access to financial services, because data now had gotten to a point that everyone could be verified and everyone could be included, and not just automatically left out because, you're new to country, we don't know who you are, there's no credit record of you. Or, you just turned 22 and you've never had a credit card, so I'm not going to give you your first one. It was that shared vision and the passion that those two individuals has that got me really excited and say, wow, I really want to come here. And I lobbied the investors and the board, and Sunil and I had a good relationship, and I took over for him as CEO.
That's terrific. So can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of the kinds of data points that you guys are aggregating or verifying as part of the digital identification verification?
Sure. First you have to start with authoritative data sources, right? Which is, and you as a consumer, when you go in, you accept the terms and conditions, you're providing a certain amount of PII. So you're providing your name, your address, depending on what you're applying for, you might be including your social security number or your date of birth. You probably include an email address or a phone number. And those things need to be verified. And just statically verifying them, does this equal that, if then else, is almost always going to run into false positives, places where you say, well, that doesn't equal that. Now, is that because I fat fingered the last two letters in my name when I'm typing on an iPhone? Or that Apple decided to autocorrect something in my address? Or does that mean that, hey, I just made a mistake, but the rest of the information correlates and makes a lot of sense? So we're taking the authoritative data that you provide, PII. We're also looking very closely and have thousands of machine learning features that correlate those data elements. The simplest one I would frequently use is, hey, the IP address is originating from New York City. The person said that their zip code was 10001 and their phone number starts with 212. Hey, those things correlate. That's all kind of New York City, so that makes a lot of sense. Now extrapolate that out to thousands of additional correlations between those data elements and other things that you consented to be on the internet, which may be where that you say on LinkedIn that you're based in New York City. But it's those correlations and also having very carefully well thought out machine learning features in an unstructured and machine learning models in a structured way that are going to, not send you to a false positive just because I'm New York City based, but I happen to be traveling in California that day. So my IP address shows California. That's not abnormal for me. I'm in tech. Makes sense I'd be in California on a particular day. I might have just changed my email address. I keep multiple email addresses. I have my spam email address that I give to just about any vendor that wants it. And then I have the one that I really only give to friends and people that I'm very close to because I don't want the spam. And then I have my work one. And which one did I decide to use on a particular application? A lot of that could change. And it's a sophistication of looking at that whole identity and the correlations of all those data points to ultimately make sure that we can verify who you are.
Yeah, it's interesting because the system can actually start to have a fingerprint, a pattern recognition of who you are, but also the lifestyle in terms of even purchases and locations, geolocations. So any deviations that move away from that pattern starts to give some alerts. And of course, you're looking for, I would imagine, not just correlation, but probability of potential concern. So in the case of
Yep.
phishing attacks, as an example, how probable is it that this person may have been compromised and somehow somebody else is trying to enact that? And we see this a lot in terms of attacks to not just financial services, but even medical and others that get taken hostage of their systems. How can some of this type of technology also be applicable for, let's say, the example of this is early May that we recorded this, where the government has sent checks to citizens across the U.S. as part of the fiscal policy, but many are receiving it when in fact they're actually deceased, or they're just not, they're nowhere to be found. It really should not have received it, as an example. Or things like census that we have to take in terms of who they are, how many people actually reside in a household, that verification that's done offline, and the challenges with some of those things.
Yeah, so great examples. You think about it, what do you have to do to qualify for the stimulus check? Assume you're making the right amount of money to qualify for the check. First, you have to have an account set up with irs.gov. That's simple enough, but a lot of people have never put in a bank account for the money to be wired. They preferred to get a check, or they just never thought of the ease and simplicity of it being wired. So there's two fraud patterns there. One, how does someone get access to your social security number and be able to ultimately get into the IRS site? But then also, how does someone then a fraudster go and open up a bank account in your name that they then the fraudster have access to? So they basically attach that bank account number to the irs.gov site, and so that the stimulus money winds up wiring into the fraudster's bank account instead of the correct person's bank account. That's a common fraud pattern. We have one of the largest payroll service companies as a client, and a very common attempted fraud, we think we're able to stop all of it, is right around the first of the year. On the dark web, you can get people's social security numbers. People go in and file a tax return on your behalf. Mm-hmm. And once again, they open up a new bank account that they attach to that fraudulent tax return. And then when you come in February or March to actually fill out your return, the IRS says, well, what are you talking about? You already filed your return. And oh, by the way, you took every imaginable deduction and got the biggest refund of your life. You can't file another return. So those are a lot of the types of fraud that we are stopping, primarily because we can correlate all the different data signals surrounding you, but also we see the patterns and we see the history. And we've now predicted over 200 million US identities. There's only 210 million US adults. So our sample size is getting close to 100%. And in statistics, the larger the sample size, the more likely you're going to be accurate in your predictions.
Actually, that's really powerful. Rarely do you get to hear that you essentially have the population in terms of the data set. That is incredible scale and depth that you guys have developed over time. I wish we had more time. We're actually out of time as of today. I've been joined by Tom Thimot, who is the CEO at Socure. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.